Thank you very much indeed, Karen Corla. Most children in Ireland are happy. Most children in Ireland are well looked after. And I often stand back in admiration with the way young mothers and fathers look after their children. How they educate them, take them to school, take them to football and hurling and swimming and music and dancing and all the other things that children do. You'd hear the jocose complaints of mothers that sometimes that they spend half their lives on the road ferrying their children from one place to another. But I think when we concentrate on the children at risk who need to be protected under the law and under the Constitution, we should remember that it's the exception, and we should look at the norm. And the norm is a situation in Ireland where we have great families looking after their children and putting an awful lot of effort into rearing their children and ensuring that their physical and intellectual and emotional and spiritual development is first class, and very often making huge sacrifices themselves to ensure that children get the best chance possible. So what we're dealing with here is something that is now considered essential because of the various incidents that has come to our attention around the country, that it is very important that specific rights of the child should be enshrined in the Constitution, so that in those very small number of exceptional cases, the state may be allowed, with the protection of the Constitution, to intervene to protect those children who are at risk. And that's what's involved here. But I think it's important because there has been such debate about children being abused, such debate about children being at risk in families and in other situations, that the norm in Ireland is decent families looking after their children and very happy children being brought forward very often with great sacrifice to their parents. I served on the Children's Rights Committee to bring forward wording that would be appropriate to put into the Constitution. The committee was very ably chaired by the then Deputy Mary O'Rourke, and Minister Francis Fitzgerald was on it, as indeed was Minister Chatter. The then leader of Sinn Féin, Cuivino Quailon, made a very strong intervention and was a great attender at meetings. And Alex White, I think, represented the Labour Party, and there were many TDs and senators of all parties that worked in that committee. And certainly that committee cleared away a lot of the undergrowth of irrelevancy and allowed TDs of all parties and senators of all parties to concentrate on what was essential. Now, in the nature of all-party committees, there were compromises at the end, and the wording brought forward, while it enjoyed the support of all parties, probably wasn't, in some respects, the first preference of any particular party. And in the interests of compromise and unanimity, additional words were put in. And I think it was important then that when Minister Fitzgerald took over, that the wording would be examined again, and that which was deemed to be redundant or unnecessary was taken out. And I have no objection to that, because I think the words published now in the bill by Minister Fitzgerald, they're better, they're more succinct, they're more focused than the wording that came from the All-Party Committee. And I think that's probably the view of many of the colleagues of all parties who were on that committee. I just make 2 points about the committee. Sometimes words are put in to get consensus. There was a phrase which some people thought should have been maintained about cherishing the children of the nation. Well, we know the origin of that. That came from the 1916 proclamation. But of course, when you look at the proclamation, that phrase was never about children. And that was children referring to all the people of Ireland, echoing Wolfe Tone. And the concept was that Catholic, Protestant and dissenter would be covered by the common name of Irishman, so all the children of the nation would be cherished equally. But it wasn't actually children. It was citizens of this republic that was the reference. So while it was a a nice idea to incorporate in the wording of the Committee on the Constitution on Children. It comes from a different origin and was actually saying something quite different. It's important to remember as well that the Supreme Court, when they look at the Constitution and make decisions on it, they expect that we as legislators don't get involved in inserting redundant language into what we decide as appropriate for amendment. So they look at it on the basis that the legislators have examined it and there's no redundant wording. So any word that goes in, they will ascribe a meaning to it on the assumption that we scrutinised it and we did have a meaning when we inserted it. So it's not possible to dress up a constitutional amendment in attractive wording that might appeal to the electorate. Because if you do that, then the Supreme Court will decide, well, if they put it in, they must have meant something, so we have to decide what it means. And then you can get a ruling by the Supreme Court which will be different from the intention of the Parliament, the Dáil and the Seanad. So what I'm saying is I totally approve of the manner in which Minister Fitzgerald pruned the wording that came from the All-Party Committee and brought it down to a far more succinct representation. I think it's worth noting as well that there has been a good record by the state in looking after children. Unlike what happens in other countries, children at risk in Ireland get family care through the fosterage system. By and large, our children at risk are not put into institutions for long periods. They're put out into families, and they have the ambience and the protection of a family. And they actually, like all other children, in effect, they are brought up within families. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that and to acknowledge the great work that's done by so many families who take children on fosterage, and indeed the state agencies who monitor their care when they are in fosterage. I'd like to say a couple of words about the debate itself. I thought there were very good speeches made here last night across party lines, and real insight into what's required and what the intentions of the Minister and the Government are in proposing this amendment. And yet it didn't get a mention at all in the news bulletins last night. Now, it seems to me that the broadcasting institutions, including RTE, have a responsibility not only to cover conflict, but also as a public broadcaster, in respect of something like a constitutional amendment, to explain what the intention is, and to use the debates of all sides of this House, which were excellent last night, to bring those explanations to the intention of the people. I think that RTE in particular, and the other broadcasting institutions as well, have a very narrow view of what they may do in terms of covering referenda. I don't believe that they need to put a stopwatch on it and divide it 50-50 between for and against. I don't think that Justice Denham's sentences in the Coughlin judgment carry that implication at all. I think as long as the coverage is fair and balanced, it seems to me that the broadcasters are within their rights of coverage. And in a referendum such as this, where most of the Dáil, practically, I think all members of the Dáil and Seanad, and the groups, the NGOs who are most interested in the care of children, are all advocating a yes vote. It seems to me to kind of invent opponents to the amendment on the basis of giving 50% of the time to some non-existent set of opponents is a very peculiar way to approach this. And I think that RTE should look at it again. And if they do it in a fair and balanced way, it seems to me they fulfill the obligations of the judgment. I think there's another issue as well. I think that they should distinguish between their set-piece debates and news coverage. I don't think the Supreme Court judgment is intended to apply to news. And I think they have a whole area in news where they can help the public debate by presenting the facts and the issues, and they're not constrained by the judgment of the Supreme Court. And if they had taken the opportunity last night to report on the debate at second stage here in this House, they could have done that and they wouldn't have contravened any judgment. And they wouldn't have to invent some bogeyman or bogey woman to come on to give some alternative opinion, even though it doesn't exist. So I think I would like RT to look at that again, because I think it's important to do so. I got a briefing note from the Minister's Department here, and it sets out the aims of the new article, and I think it's worth putting them on the record, and I'm sure people have put it on the record already. The central aim of the new article is to directly recognise children in their own right within the Constitution, and by doing so to give children special protection because of their age and potential vulnerability. In brief, the constitutional amendment for people to decide by referendum aims to do the following. One, to place the article in the Constitution which directly deals with children's rights. Two, to revise the language used regarding when and how the state should be able to step in and protect the welfare and safety of a child, to put a focus on the child. This will continue to recognise that children are best reared by their parents, and that it is only in exceptional cases where parents fail in their duty towards their children, the state should take action to ensure the safety and the welfare of children. The three, to require that any action by the state to protect children should be proportionate, meaning that actions should be measured strictly by reference to tackling the problems causing harm to the child. Number four, to provide that the rights and protections set out in the new article should apply equally to all children, regardless of whether or not their parents are married. Number five, to allow for the adoption of children in wider circumstances than at present. This will allow for a revised approach to be set out in law for the adoption of certain children who have been reared by foster parents for a considerable period by reason of the failure of their parents to look after or care for them. It will allow also for a new law to make possible the voluntary placement for adoption of any child, including children whose parents are married. And next, to add to the strength of existing laws that require the best interests of the child to be the first and most important consideration for judges in deciding court cases concerning child protection and welfare, adoption, guardianship, custody of and access to any child. And lastly, to ensure that in making decisions in court cases of the kind already mentioned above, the views and wishes of the child should be obtained and taken fully into account, bearing in mind the child's age and maturity. I think that last point is very, very important, because it's not only that the amendment will give a specific constitutional right to the rights of children, and it's not only that the state will be enabled without any fear of crossing constitutional boundaries to intervene to protect children in exceptional cases, but when the court does intervene and intervenes to protect children, the child will have a say in its own future. And I think that is very important, because, you know, all of you are familiar with children, and many of us had children, and at a very early age, children have a reasonably good view of what they want and what's in their best interests. And it's very important that that right should be in the Constitution as well, and the court should be directed in processes protecting the interests of children to take the views of children into account. So I'd like to congratulate Minister Fitzgerald for the work she has done. I think she's done an amazing piece of work after such a long delay. There have been people talking about this 20 years ago, right back to the Kilkenny incest case, where there was a recommendation that exactly this should be done. And after such a short period in government, I think it's admirable that Minister Fitzgerald has brought this forward. Also that she has had consultations with so many interest groups and has their confidence to the degree that they're backing this amendment. So far the Church has been silent. The Roman Catholic Church has been silent, and the other churches haven't come out yet either. I would like if the churches made a very clear statement at an early date saying that they favoured this referendum. Thank you very much.